Welcome, Tim Curry, to Cleveland.
Thank you.
First time here?
Yes.
What do you think of the reaction to the Rocky Horror Picture Show that you have found in the brief time you've been here?
Well, I just sort of got here yesterday, and I went to the first birthday party. It was wonderful, actually, because the excitement was such that the cake had already been eaten by the time that I got there. They had saved me a piece, which was wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
The reaction was splendid. I mean, the reaction is... The marvelous thing for me about the movie is that it has found its own audience. I mean, apart from one man at 20th Century Fox who was called Tim Deegan, to whom I'm forever grateful, who was new in the marketing department of 20th Century Fox, who was given this picture, and I think he just sort of joined the marketing department, and they said, see what you can do with this turkey. Really. This was in, I suppose, late 75. And he put it in at midnight in New York at the Waverly, and it's from there found its own audience, which is wonderful. I mean, the worldwide advertising budget from 20th Century Fox for the Rocky Horror Picture Show is $50,000, which actually just about pays for it to be listed in the entertainment column of every local newspaper. So to come to Cleveland, where I'd never been, but I mean, clearly lots of friends had, and I knew that it was here, and find that kind of enthusiasm and that kind of, well, wonderful party is marvellous, obviously.
But you've seen this elsewhere, haven't you? I mean, where
Yes, I have. Well, I haven't been very many other places in America. I've been to New York and Los Angeles a lot.
Is the Rocky Horror Picture Show playing in all those cities?
Yes, it is.
So you're really known by that film wherever you go in America?
Yes.
And it's the same kind of reaction?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. What do you personally think of that in relationship to you as an artist, a performer, and so forth?
Well, it's fascinating to me because my career, I mean, career actually is a word that I really don't use very much, because I actually think of it as the work, whatever. It's a very long, ongoing process as far as I'm concerned. And in America, it's kind of different because, apart from New York, where I've also been on Broadway in another play, Travesties, it's the only thing that people know here that I've done, apart from this new record. So I'm very strongly identified with it, and it's a kind of mystifying time warp for me, because I first did this in 1973 and did a movie in 1974. So it's already 4 years on for me.
And you've done so many things since.
Yes, that it's actually rather exciting, because it's a constant reminder to me of a particular period of my life, but also of the work.
Do you mind if I retrace those years now? I'm sure you've done this a lot, and we're going to get on to Tim Curry outside of Dr. Frankenfurter. Please believe me, I'm not going to keep you in that time warp. I think it's...
We're on a time machine.
Exactly.
A warp is fine by me.
Very well put. No, but I saw it in London when it first came out.
Yes, you were our first champion.
Oh, I was, unconsciously. I didn't realize it at the time, and I played it on this station. The first time, I think, in America it was heard.
That was very exciting to me when we talked about that. It was wonderful.
The London album, the original cast, and it was before 20th Century Fox even knew of the film, the show. Let's go back, because here you were 4 or 5 years ago, coming up with this thing, this unusual satire on lots of so-called establishment factors. How did it begin? How did the show start?
It started very much with Richard O'Brien. I mean, it's a kind of terrible shopping bag of Richard O'Brien's worst fantasies, or best fantasies. And I knew Richard a little, because we were both in Hair, I was in Hair in London, and he was in the National Company. So we used to bump into each other at kind of improbable hippie parties in the sort of late 60s in London. And I knew him kind of vaguely, and at the time that we were just starting the show, well, before he was starting the show, I was living in a street called Paddington Street in London, which is famous only for its particularly good fishmonger. But it also had a gymnasium in the street. And I was coming out of my door one day, and Richard O'Brien was coming by, and I said, hello, what are you doing in my street, or whatever? And he said, I've just been to the gymnasium next door. And I said, oh, what are we doing in the gymnasium? He said, well, I was looking for a muscle man who could sing. So I asked him why he needed a muscle man to sing.
Yes.
And he said he'd written a musical and it was going to be done at the Royal Court Theatre upstairs. And I said, well, that was very odd because I was doing the play that was on at the moment at that theatre.
What was the play?
It was called Give the Gaffers Time to Love You. But I had a rock song in it called Blacks in Cages, which was about repatriating all of England's West Indians back to the West Indies. It was a very nasty song. And I staggered around with a bottle of port and sang it. And the director of the Rocky Horror Show came to see it because they knew I was going to audition. And then I auditioned and I sang Tutti Frutti, the Little Richard tune. And I read a speech of Frankenfurter's, a speech in the lab about, at last paradise is to be mine. So that's how I got it, and that's how we started doing it. In a tiny theatre with seated 60 people for a month's run.
That was where it began. What's the name of the theatre?
The Royal Court Theatre upstairs.
Upstairs. Where did I see it?
You saw it probably at the Classic Cinema, I think.
Yes.
Which, because originally the play was set in an abandoned movie house that was due for demolition,
Right.
and it was draped with blue tarpaulins that said Acme Demolition Company, and we did it in front of a very sort of done-over Art Deco screen.
But what hand did you have in the portrayal insofar as the makeup, the gestures, the ambience, the whole bit? I mean, how much of it was direction and how much of it was you?
Well, originally, see, I thought when I read it, I didn't realize when I read it that, because originally it wasn't even clear really that he was a sort of mad transvestite. I mean, I kind of saw space clothes and things. And then we brought in a designer who I'd worked with before to do the clothes, Sue Blaine, who I'd actually done several productions with before at a repertory company in Scotland, including a production of The Maids, in fact, which was where the corset first happened, because we did a production of The Maids where I played Solange, and we got this terrible old Edwardian corset off a barrow in Glasgow in Scotland. And so we used it again for Rocky, and it became the Transylvanian national costume, which changed the whole feeling of the play, really, from a sort of Star Trek thing.
So it was your own doing then?
Well, no, because Richard's favourite thing is Fredericks of Hollywood. I mean, he was obsessed with Fredericks of Hollywood, long before that was smart. Also, I mean, I didn't have them together at all until the last 2 days when I finally got the courage to go down to King's Road in London and buy some high heels. I mean, Frankenfurter in sneakers is not quite the same thing at all.
Well, this is your own doing again. In other words, you kept on building this character by trial and error, etc., but it's really your own conception of this thing, right?
I suppose so, yes. I mean, in that really the key to him in the end was the awful kind of gracious hostess, I mean, the one thing that I'd learned from doing The Maids was that drag is only interesting if it's a man doing it. Otherwise it's just, a sort of rather tired imitation of a woman, and that's really not very interesting at all. The thing about Frank is that it doesn't occur to him that his costume is anything out of the ordinary at all. I mean, that's just really what he's used to wearing. It's like, getting up and putting on jeans and a sweatshirt for him.
What do you think is the fascination that this movie has to the young people of America, which is really a surprise when you consider that the picture has so many in things which kids basically wouldn't accept or understand?
Oh, I think all the in things are sort of, they all have down now. I mean, that's wonderful. I mean, I love the way that people really get into the details of the movie, and but one of the things that I think I really sort of started to put together last night, and began to be very clear to me, was that there is a very strong part of the audience in America sees that they kind of ought to be Brad and Janet, but aren't, and are so thrilled and happy that they're not. That Brad and Janet come in for a very strong share of abuse, and it's they're so happily anti-establishment. They're so they wouldn't be caught dead in Ouijan loafers or whatever, or that the sort of awful little Peter Pan collars and things that Janet wears. That they, it's a very clear chance to disassociate themselves from the mainstream of American culture, because
it's an anti-establishment revolt.
Well, I think it's particularly anti-middle class too, sort of, the sort of suburban pattern. You do get engaged at college, you do fight for the bride's bouquet, and you do end up in a track future. I don't think they ever did. I think it's, I mean, totally a reaction against the suburban pattern. I mean, God knows I reacted against the suburban pattern. I mean, it was very clear to me when I was 17 or 18, living as I did in the suburbs of London, that you know, ideally you were engaged by the time you were 19, 20, 21. I mean, it gets a little bit later every year because the horror dawns on people earlier, and that by the time you're 25, you have a mortgage and a tract house and at least your first child. And you know, kids are much brighter and wiser about that now. I mean, they're offered a lot more alternatives. And I mean, the great thing about Frankenfurter is he offers you any alternative you wish. Don't dream it, be it. You know, get out there, do it. Whichever way turns you on. But he doesn't. The other good thing about Frankenfurter is he doesn't actually really want to hurt anybody. He wouldn't hurt a fly if it wasn't necessary. But he does have he's very unhappy about his temper.
Yes.
It does get the better of him. He does serve people up as meals.
Right. Do you think that this is influencing the youth of America or even elsewhere to try things that possibly society would condemn?
I don't know that it's influencing them to try it at all. I think it's just influencing them to keep their mind a little more open. And that is certainly a victory.
Yes, it is.
To say, you know, listen, all things are possible, and let's entertain the possibility.
Right.
It doesn't mean to say you have to rush out, you know, and screw anything that moves.
Also, it has a very good effect in the idea of tolerance. These kids are going to accept the difference of people without looking at them with such disdain.
Well, I think so, because, I mean, the thing about Frankenfurter is that his sexual tastes are completely pansexual. I mean, he's really interested in the sort of corners of people, or in obvious parts of people's nature. Or he finds most people attractive, really, and he'll entertain the notion of sleeping with anybody, really. But he's actually seeing it kind of as people, you know, not as you know, obvious sort of sexual vibrations or anything. And because he is an attractive person on a kind of double level, I mean, it makes it so much easier to handle.
Mm-hmm. But you said there's no similarity between you and that character in any way, right?
Oh, I don't know what the similarities are. I mean, I'll probably still be documenting them for the next sort of 20 years. I mean, the thing about playing somebody like that is it wakes you up to all those possibilities as well. So, I mean, the one thing that I've always been very concerned to do is not to limit myself either. And whether it's artistically or physically or sexually or mentally, or, I mean, he's been a great lesson to me, put it that way.